listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
Hey, how's it all going out there? And hope you're all well. I'm Rob Lane, and thanks for checking out my show, the Straight to Video podcast. I am excited to welcome one of Canada's finest rock singers to the podcast, as my guest today is none other than Lee Aaron. Lee has been writing, recording and releasing albums since her debut back in 1982, followed by a bunch of successful releases including Metal Queen, Body Rock and Some Girls Do, all showcasing her killer vocals and great songs. And right now she is all set to release a brand new album, Radio On, which lands on July 23rd. Lee has been on a pretty incredible journey since she was spotted in a local music production at just 15 years old, which was kind of the starting point for her rock and roll journey, which has seen several twists and turns. In our chat, we talk all about her first trips to the UK, from performing at the legendary Marquee Club, followed by a slot at Reading Festival. She also shares some of the obstacles female performers face, particularly during the 80s, and then the battles with record companies in the ever unpredictable musical climate of the 1990s. This really was a great talk, and I appreciated Lee taking some time to be a guest on the show. I also want to give a shout to Lee's bandmate and previous guest on this podcast, Sean Kelly, for helping hook this chat up, which is massively appreciated. Thank you ever so much, mate. Before we dive in, as always, please give my friends Dead Skull Coffee a visit at deadskullcoffee.co.uk, where you can grab a mighty 15% discount off their ground or full bean coffee, and know you're supporting a super fine independent rock and roll company who continue to go from strength to strength. Just fill your shopping cart at deadskullcoffee.co.uk and add the promo code STV on checkout to grab that sweet discount. If you want to find out more about Lee Aaron and her new album Radio On, please head on over to leeaaron.com, where all up-to-date information can be found, along with a great merch store and links to her YouTube, where she is pretty active too. Certainly lots going on over there, so please pay the site a visit. But in the meantime, please enjoy my straight-to-video talk with Lee Aaron. Lee, thanks ever so much for doing this. It's great to hook up, and I appreciate your guitarist Sean putting us in touch. How did you guys meet up? Was it through his Metal on Ice book and that whole project?
Yeah, I didn't even know of Sean. And, I get like every week I get asked through Facebook Messenger or whatever to like sing on somebody's record or be part of somebody's book. And I have to really filter through those. In fact, I let my husband do a lot of the vetting kind of work. But he forwarded me Sean's message, and he just came across the way he presented himself as very well-spoken and eloquent and seemed like a nice guy. And then I thought, and when he said, I played with Nelly and, Helix, I thought, okay, he's for real. Right. And so we first met through his book, and we got along very, very well. Because, he's a smart guy and he's a super nice guy. And
he knows his rock and roll history as well.
Well, he totally does, but not in a big, lunkhead kind of way. You know what I mean? He's well spoken, he's educated, and I really appreciated that. And then of course the Metal on Ice thing snowballed into a companion CD and also a live concert featuring those artists. And then from there, he was kind of like, if you ever need a sub, like for your guitar player, I would just love the opportunity to play in your band. And so as it turned out, I was sort of considering the possibility of having an East Coast pickup players and West Coast guys, because it was starting to get expensive to fly everybody everywhere. And so I said, I got a show coming up in Toronto. Would you like to play on it? And he said, yeah, like, hell yeah, I'm there. So we put together a rehearsal, and literally from the first few chords of the first song, me, Dave, and John were just like, oh my gosh, he's the guy. He's the guy that we have been looking for a decade to play in this band.
Just felt right straight away.
Well, it just became glaringly apparent. Like, my husband has a unique style of rock drumming, more of the school of Keith Moon, John Bonham. He's a little bit of a bluesy, like, he almost has, how do I explain it? Like he brings a Gene Krupa element into his playing, much like Moon did, right? And he plays a little bit behind the beat, and like, he's a real traditional rock player from that era, and which I love. I think it brings a really neat sound, and not many players can lock into that mindset and play along with it. And, a lot of guys are just like, quantized to the grid, right? And like, we're not that band, and Sean is not that guy. And we were like, man, you're the guy. And like, so we're like, you got to join our band. And so that led to him playing more shows, and then us sort of bouncing some song ideas around in the dressing room. And we're like, we should write a record together. And then the end result was Fire and Gasoline, and then Diamond Baby, then the live album, then the Christmas album, then, Radio On, the new one. So
it's great because you've got this guy who can bring not just rock, but he can bring all these other styles in, like the blues, pop, classical influence as well, which he's totally accustomed to. So, and you've never shied from different styles in the past either.
Yeah, that's why he fits so well in this band, because it's not like, we live and die by our Judas Priest records. They're a great band, don't get me wrong, but we are a group of musicians that have a lot of varied influences. I equally love Janis Joplin and Nina Simone. I think you hear those elements of influence creeping out in my songwriting and my performance, right? And Sean brings that to the table as well.
So you're out in Vancouver now on the west coast of Canada, but if I'm right, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're born in Ontario, spent a few years in Winnipeg as a young girl, then moved to Brampton near Toronto, where you went to high school. Did I get the geography right?
You got it right. Hey, he's done his, finally, I've talked to somebody that's done their research, because it's frustrating when I get asked, the same questions over and over.
So do you remember much of that moving around? Was you in the city, or was it kind of small town Canada?
I was born in a little town called Belleville, Ontario, which is about, 2 hours east of Toronto. And I lived there till I was 2. Ironically, it's funny because every place you live loves to embrace you as part of their history. And so they built a new wing at the hospital in Belleville, a new birthing wing. And then they have a stars wall, because I guess quite a few famous people came from Belleville, and they asked me for an 8x10 to hang in there. Like, these people were born at the Belleville Hospital, right? So, and then I lived in Transcona, which is a suburb of Winnipeg. My dad was transferred there for business when I was 2. But here's an interesting story. And it's funny because I've mentioned this a few times, but I've also wrote a little bit about it recently because I'm writing a book. My parents moved on to this little street called Dowling Avenue, and 2 doors down from us lived Blair and Ann McLean. Blair McLean was part of a rock group called the Vicious Circle with his brother, Gary McLean. And they became a comedy duo in Canada called McLean and McLean. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. It's kind of like really base SCTV style humor. It's they called it toilet rock, but they toured a lot. But they were all buddies with the guys in the Guess Who, and especially Burton Cummings. When I was a little girl, like literally like 4 or 5 years old, Burton Cummings used to come, and they'd have parties at that house. They'd rehearse at that house, and my sister and I would go over and we would knock on the door to play with their son, Kevin McLean, who was our age. And Anne would go, can you go downstairs and get Burton up? He's still asleep on the couch. And we'd go down there and we'd wake up Burton Cummings and go, Anne says, get up now, come for breakfast. Like a couple times when the Guess Who became big, he came back to visit, and he bought a new Jag, and we went for rides he took the kids in the neighborhood for a ride in his Jag. And so, yeah, it was my little Canadiana connection there.
So when did you discover you had a talent for singing? Was that picked up by your parents or through school? Because was it like musical theatre you did from like a really young age?
Yeah, I did a lot of musical theatre when I was young. I started singing literally around the age of 5. And then when I was 3, I was cast as the main singing role in Heidi. And I went on from there through high school to be involved in musical productions. In fact, our local high school in Brampton, Central Field Secondary, was well known for its musical theater productions. And we entered into local competitions and won some awards. And so that was my thing, was musical theater and choir. And then I was discovered by the bass player from a local rock band. I was in grade 10 and he was in grade 12 or 13, and he went to my high school, and his brother was crew on the production I was in. So he came to see the production and he heard me sing and he was like, wow, that girl has a powerful voice. So he approached me and he's like, I'm Graham and I'm Rob's brother, and would you come and audition for our band? And I was like, okay. At that time I was obsessed with the Heart Little Queen album and songs like Barracuda. And
because I usually ask people where they used to like buy their music from, but you had like a really cool opportunity when your dad managed to pick up like an entire collection of records from a radio station.
Well, it was a college radio station, but yeah, like I had a whole, that's when I discovered like Bowie, Steely Dan, the Strawbs, Elton John. Just trying to think of what else. The Runaways, Queens of Noise was in that pile.
Had you heard of any of these bands before, or was you like judging them on face value?
Sort of heard of them, but I'd never, I didn't, my parents weren't rich and I didn't have the resources to go buy all these albums. So suddenly I had like a 200 record collection, right? Of vinyl. I was just like freaking out. That's when I discovered a lot of this stuff, because so those became very important influences in my young teen years. I discovered Zeppelin and The Who. Zeppelin and The Who were pretty big for me.
Did you find like role models in, so you mentioned like the Runaways, so like people like Lita Ford, and I think you said like Susie Quattro before, and obviously the Hart Sisters. Is that where you found like role models for yourself?
Well, the Hart Sisters for sure, I think, made me want to be a girl rocker. I was like, man, these girls play their own instruments, they write their songs, they've partnered with these brothers in this band, and my guys in my band felt like my brothers to me. And so to me, it sort of encapsulated everything that I thought was what I was working toward. The Runaways, I loved their attitude. And I was kind of like, man, they're my age. And they're like doing this. But what I don't think I completely understood is that there was a little bit of a, the Kim Fowley thing, behind that, as the mastermind behind that. Right. And, but yeah, for sure. And yeah, Susie Quattro, for sure. She was badass.
Still is.
Totally.
So that's kind of like your introduction to hard rock. So this bass player invites you to audition. So did you see that as kind of, oh, this is my chance to be like my heroes in a way?
Absolutely. Yeah.
How was the audition? How did the parents feel about some guy saying, oh, do you want to come and audition for our band?
Well, my dad drove me. My dad's like, I'm not sending you to a basement with a bunch of boys.
With a baseball bat.
Yeah. So, and my father had always been sort of, I wouldn't say living vicariously, but, he was very proud. And, I was his girl, and his, he'd been very proud of all the musical productions I'd been in. And so it was a very much of a sense of pride, is like, I'll take you. And if they're good enough for my daughter, I'll let you join the band. But I guess they had auditioned a bunch of male singers as well, but I sang the best. So, I guess there was a little bit of internal fighting. There was an older gentleman in the band. Well, when I say older, I think he was 20, and he was the only guy who had a full-time job. His name was Ray Van Dorn, and he was the keyboard player. And truth be known, he was not a very good keyboard player, but he had a job. He was a maintenance mechanic for Dr. Ballard's dog food factory, and he made good money. And so he owned the PA and all the equipment. So they let him be in the band. Right. And he's like, yeah, but she sings the best. And they're like, yeah, but we didn't picture our band with a girl singer. And anyway, Ray won. I ended up getting the gig in the band, and it snowballed from there.
Sweet. Where did you all rehearse? Was it just in like some garage or something?
First, we rehearsed in Ray's brother's basement. Ray had an older brother named Ben, so he let us set up our gear and rehearse down there. He was a single bachelor guy with a townhome. And then later on, because Ray was like the real responsible one of the band, he ended up saving up enough money to buy a little house in, I think it was Georgetown, which was, again, another step outside Toronto, but it was affordable. And now we had like a real bona fide rehearsal space in a basement owned by our keyboard player. These are neat questions. I've never talked about this stuff.
So was that, if I've got this right, was that band already called Lee Aaron before you joined, or was that a name you guys adopted once you joined the band?
Yeah, well, we were just like young teens in the 70s. So we were a product of the pop culture of the decade. So we were looking for a band name like Jethro Tull or Max Webster, or something that was just a name that was kind of anonymous. And so we threw a bunch of references in a hat, amongst them Lee Jeans and Aaron Spelling, who was, I think, did The Love Boat or something like that. He was a big television producer at that time. And I know this is so stupid, right? And we pulled names out of a hat and we're like, oh, Aaron and Lee Aaron. They're like, Lee Aaron, that would be a cool name for a band. So we took the name Lee Aaron. Then my first manager, we played a concert the summer I was 18, and my first manager signed us, put us out on the road, and he pulled me out from behind the keyboards because I was playing keyboards and saxophone and only singing about 50% of the material at that point in time, because my guitar player, George, was a good singer and he sang the other half of the material. And my manager's like, no, we're going to bring you, you're going to be the front person. We're going to bring you out front. You can play keyboards for a couple songs, but that's it. Then people just thought I was Lee Aaron.
I think I've heard stories where people used to refer to David Lee Roth as Van Halen as if that was his name, like Van Morrison or something like that. Promoters used to say, oh, who's the Van Halen guy?
Right.
Just associated it with the singer.
Well, for reasons of anonymity, it just became easier when people thought I was Lee Aaron to take the name, because it's been a beneficial thing throughout my life just to keep my private and personal life really separate. And hey, like David Bowie, Tina Turner, Alice Cooper, Elton John, just to name a few. They all have stage names, right?
They did good with those names, picking them out of an hat. It's a cool sounding name. So did you approach your singing totally different once you was in like the rock band dynamic from what you'd done before? Because you had like a proper metal voice on that earlier stuff. It was proper rock voice.
Well, maybe that's because I grew up with proper training. Like I did a lot of choir and theater work and some vocal training in that area. And so I've always taken care of my voice, I don't know really what to say. That's just what came out when I stepped up and sang. I had some power in my voice.
Once you'd finished high school, is that when you kind of went out with the band full time on the road?
The summer I finished high school, I was 17, turning 18. Ray, who was older, managed to finagle things because he was he was like kind of the brains in the band. Even if the guys in the band considered him a lesser player, he definitely was the brains of the band at that time. He did things like put together promo packages for us, arranged photographers, approached people at city council about getting us on some big summer band shell series.
He did all the crap you guys didn't want to do.
We didn't understand. We were still kids, right? And then and that summer, so we ended up they had a concert series at the Chinguacousy Band Shell, which was the downtown big like summertime, festival kind of place. And he got us a gig there. And I don't really know how or why, but I don't know if he'd heard of my first manager or if my first manager had heard of us through some of the local news. But he, for whatever reason, he ended up at this show, saw us perform and was just like, wow, you guys are great. Let me manage you. You guys are all done in high school. Perfect. Let me put you on the road. I was the youngest though. So I had just turned 18 and he ended up putting me out on the road with Ray Ray was my official chaperone. I wasn't even old enough to drink and I was playing in clubs. So
how was that for you? Was that like a tough decision to make? Did your family approve of that? Or did they have like visions of you going down, I always call it like the normal route of a career path? Or was you like seeing it as an opportunity to grab while you was so young?
I think he saw it as an opportunity. But, there was a bit of discussion back and forth because I was and I feel kind of goofy saying this, but I was a straight A student. I had graduated with 2 scholarships. So I was a pretty bright girl, but I loved music. It was my art. I was already starting to write songs and I was recording with a 4-track TAC machine by myself at that point, and just like the Beatles. But hey, so there was a bit of discussion about, is this a wise idea? Because I basically had to forfeit those scholarships to go out on the road. But I said to my parents, look, I really am passionate about this. I'd love to give it a try. I'm going to give it 2 years. If success is not starting to come, then I will quit and I will go back to university, right? Because I was already enrolled for a Bachelor of Arts in Interior Design at Humber College, because that's my other geek thing. Like I'm addicted to decorating magazines. I love aesthetic. So that was my thing, right? So I was going to art school. But within the first year, my first manager put me together with a bunch of notable Canadian musicians, and I'd recorded my first album. And things started to progress from there. And then going over to Europe, and I was showcasing at the Marquee Club. And so it certainly wasn't overnight success for me. I actually didn't have really big success until my fifth album, but it was slow stepping stones, right? Every step of the way, and it's like, I'd go, oh, well, I can't go back to university now. I'm supposed to go play Reading Festival, right? And so it just ended up progressing like that. And then I ultimately I did go back to post-secondary. A lot of people don't know this. In 1991, when I was writing the Some Girls Do album, I went back and took another year of fine arts because I had the time and the luxury to do so while I was writing an album. And then I subsequently went back to school about 10 years ago when our son was little and got a degree in special education because he had some struggles that I really wanted to help him with. And I really wanted to understand better again, but I never ended up getting my Bachelor of Interior Design.
You mentioned it briefly there. The debut album, it got a bit of a buzz in the UK. I think it was just on an import release.
It was.
But that led you to doing a show at the famous and legendary Marquee Club. But is it right, it was just you who flew over and you had like a backup band?
That's correct.
That must have been daunting for you from like touring with all the time. And I guess you got used to gelling with musicians. And then all of a sudden you got to fly 3,500 miles to the UK and hope this band's going to get the job done.
My first manager had some brilliant ideas and some not so brilliant ideas. The things that I struggled with was his ideas for how I should be marketed, which was very, very much as a pinup girl. But again, to have some grace for him, this was the culture of the 80s, which was very, very sexist. And, I would show up for a photo session. He would have arranged the photographers. And the next thing you know, it's like, they're like taping my boobs together with gaffer tape to make them look bigger. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Like, this is just, it was nutty. Right. And so, yeah, some of those early photographs, I'd really like to live them down because they're a little bit embarrassing. Certainly now that I have a 16-year-old daughter, I don't want her emulating herself after that. But he had other great ideas. And he's like, okay, you know what? We got to get you in Kerrang magazine, because he knew Kerrang was a powerful European magazine. And so he sent all these photos over to this writer named Paul Suter. And he said, are you interested? And he sent him my first album. Thankfully, I had the musical goods to back it up, right? He said, are you interested in doing an article on this girl? And Paul freaked out. He's like, let's do a feature. I love her. I think she's great. And so he did this feature, which got me a full page thing and a big feature in Kerrang. And then that subsequently led to them going, you really need to bring her over here to do a show because her album is flying out the door at this little import record shop called Shades. Do you remember this shop? Yeah. And so that led to him getting a gig at the Marquee, but I was broke. We had like no money. And they're like, well, maybe my parents, I think, lent enough money for me to buy a plane ticket. I think it was the first time I'd ever been on a plane to fly over to England. And Paul Suter found this band from Manchester called Sam Thunder. And they learned all the material on my first album and I think a couple of cover tunes. And that's how we put together the show. And I just had to get up there and do my thing and sing well. And thankfully, here's a funny thing, because one of the reviews from the Marquee Club, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you this, said, I'm embarrassed, but yet conversely proud, said, well, Leanne, she looks great, but she's flat and flaccid compared to her promotional pictures. But she sings fantastic. She has a powerhouse voice. So there you go. And then that subsequently led to the invitation to perform at the Reading Festival in 1983.
That was with your full band, right?
That's correct. Then we're like, okay, they actually paid us barely enough money to buy flights, but we knew it was important to do again. So we barely had enough money to cover our flights. We slept on Paul Suter's floor.
Crazy. Do you remember what time slot you got at Reading? Was it like an afternoon slot?
Well, it was light out. So I was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that. It was pretty early.
Because that's all on YouTube. I was watching some of that. I was like, that's amazing. You got all this stuff documented. There's like full shows. There's a lot of UK shows because I think you did quite a few home videos back in the day. So it's great that you've got all these little parts of your career documented. It's awesome.
Yeah, well, it's neat that it's out there. And that was Bob went, oh, there's a film crew? Here's $500. You're going to film my band, right? He was smart that way.
That's great. You did quite a good bit of touring with Bon Jovi around like 1985 on their second album before things like really exploded for them with Slippery When Wet. Did you all have much interaction? Could you tell when a band's about to break that big? Or was there any indication of that?
I remember that tour quite well, actually. And we got a lot of really, really good reviews on that tour as well. They were super nice guys. super nice guys. And yeah, you could definitely feel an energy about it, that there was just something big was about to happen, because they were just, I don't know, they were like poster boys for the mid 80s, right? At that time, in terms of, and you know what? They were probably the pioneers of taking that sort of hair metal thing, but commercializing it, right? Likewise, we were also writing music. And then the reason we were such a good fit on that bill together is we had mastered the monster guitar sound with really strong choruses and melodies. And that's what Bon Jovi was doing. So that's why we were a really good, I think, melding on that tour. But yeah, there was definitely some magic behind that band, and it was about to happen.
You obviously go on to have big success with your album Metal Queen and its following albums up until the early 90s, when we got like the inevitable change in the musical climate. How was that time for you? Because you really embraced that whole new wave of alternative music and used it as a way to broaden your creativity. You saw it as an opportunity for more female artists to come to the forefront. You obviously had like Alanis Morissette from Canada, and there's people like Sheryl Crow, Garbage, Joan Osborne, all these great female acts, but it seemed record companies wanted to distance themselves from artists who had success in the 80s, no matter how good their new material was. I've heard it from so many bands from that genre who like found it, I can do this exciting new music, but because they had links to the 80s, record companies didn't seem interested anymore. It's crazy.
I have to tell you, that was extremely disheartening for me, because I had my greatest success in 89 and 91. Some girls do, you know. I was still in my 20s when I did that record. So when everything changed around 92, 93, I was like, hell yeah. I love Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and Nirvana. And I was just like, this is amazing music. And what I loved about it was it broke away from the formulaic sound of the 80s, which is kind of where I was wanting to go anyway. So yeah, I think I made a couple of great albums in the mid 90s, but it was a perception thing. All of the media and the labels were just like, sorry, you're part of the old school. This is the new school, and your name is mud. And it was very, very difficult. And so I made Emotional Rain in 94. And I brought Knox Chandler from the Psychedelic Furs up to play on that album, and Reeves Gabrels from David Bowie's Tin Machine. I brought in the rhythm section from a Vancouver band called the Sons of Freedom that was one of the top Canadian West Coast alt bands at the time. I love that record. And a lot of fans tell me it's one of their favorite albums of mine.
Is that the one which went under the name Too Precious?
That was the next record. So let me tell you the story. So Emotional Rain came out. I just couldn't get any traction going. I had gone from being a double platinum artist in Canada to trying so hard to get that album off the ground. And I was like trying to, sending personal emails to Kim Clark Champness, that much music going like, come on, you've got to put this into at least medium rotation for us. This is killing the album, and it's a great album. And it was really, really hard. Anyway, to make a long story short, I realized I was banging my head against a wall, as were many artists of that era. And the guys in Sons of Freedom, I'd become good pals with them. And they said, hey, man, if you ever want, you should meet our guitar player, Don Harrison. He's great. And if you ever want to just do an album that's something completely different, come up to the West Coast and just make a record with us. It'd be super fun. And maybe it was a professional failure, but it was I think it was a great artistic accomplishment. I just sold everything. I came to the West Coast and I'm like, okay, guys, let's make a record. And that's when we made Too Precious. I'm still really proud of that record. I think it's a great alt record, a great melodic alt record for that time. I mean, I think it's, I hesitate to compare myself, but it's on a caliber with Garbage. But because the name Lee Aaron was associated with it, it was just like so hard to get anybody interested in it.
Was it presented to a label without your name attached to it and they thought it was great?
Where are you getting all this info?
Because I've heard that from other bands as well. I mentioned the band Warrant on this podcast probably more times than I should, but I heard that they did that one time. They recorded a demo under a different name, presented it to a label, and the label was like, holy shit, this is amazing. Who is this new band? And as soon as they told them, oh no, sorry, not interested now.
I'll tell you what happened. Okay, so we did the album, and one of the lead single on that album was going to be a song called Super Bitch. Really cool tune. I had hired a promotional guy, one of the top promotional guys in Toronto at the time, a guy named Bobby Gale. And so what he did is he took teasers of the album and he went into the number one alt station in Toronto, was a station called CFNY, and he played them Super Bitch. They freaked out. They were like, this is amazing. we're definitely going to go on this. And he said, it's a Canadian supergroup. I can't tell you who are the players yet, so I'm going to keep you guessing. Well, they were guessing all kinds of names. They guessed that Juliana Hatfield was the singer. He ended up telling them it was Sons of Freedom with another singer. And then they kept guessing who was the singer. When he told them it was Lee Aaron, everything got shut down. The plug got pulled. And it was like, But yeah, that was just a guilty by association, right?
Because it was such a creative time. It was like a weird time for music, but it was a creative time for everybody. And it's like, did the staff at record labels change? Did the labels stay the same? Or was it just these guys at record labels who were just clamoring to try and keep up with how exciting the music was getting?
Combination of both. You were either clamoring to keep your job, or you had lost your job and you'd be replaced by the new school, right? From
then on, I mean, you definitely stayed within music over the years with touring and albums, but you did perhaps step away from the limelight a bit, and it kind of gave you a chance to, let's say, reassess things. You did stay busy, but you revisited earlier musical loves and incorporated jazz and blues into your discography, and also got a chance to start a family, which is awesome. It seems now that you're in like an incredibly comfortable and rewarding place in your career to just like walk your own path, like with what the internet allows you to do, to be like DIY, and you've got a great support group of musicians, but there's still a core fan base of your fans of your early material, but you also get the opportunity to make the albums you want to make, such as the new one which you've got coming out, Radio On. So that's kind of a cool position to be in.
Well, the beautiful thing about nowadays is that I'm just doing things completely differently. Basically, I'm the mother label, my own little one lady operation, right? Called Big Sister Records. And I finance everything myself. I produce the records, so my last, everything from basically Slick Chick onward, which was my 2000 album, 2004, Beautiful Things. Then of course our daughter and our son were born, and I took about a decade off recording to put my creative energies into motherhood. But when I came back with Fire and Gasoline in 2016, the beautiful thing is, by not being attached to a major label, the climate in the 80s and early 90s, I mean, these labels were spending $250,000, $500,000 on records and videos and promotion and marketing. And so believe me, when someone's investing this amount of money in you, they are going to have some opinions about the product, right? And so I feel like there was this constant back and forth of those early albums for me where I was making compromises with my art. Don't get me wrong. I think those records are a great reflection of the culture and the time. But, there were, I'll give you an example. In 1988, 89, we were interviewing producers for our new album, which John Albany and I had written Body Rock, which was almost triple platinum in Canada, as you know. We'd written Body Rock, and the label had brought up Pat Glasser, who had produced Night Ranger. Remember this guy? Lovely guy, but we attended this boardroom meeting with the suits from the label. Pat was there, and basically in the conversations, he's like, I love Lee's voice. I love her sound, and I'm very interested in producing her. And the label guys are like, yay, we're getting a producer who's just done a hit band. But then in the course of the conversation, he's kind of like, well, I'm not really hearing this material, but I have some songs that I think would be good for Lee. And John and I are kind of like scratching our heads going, this isn't really working for us, And so we finished the meeting, and the label is like, yay, let's go. Let's sign this guy and bring him on. And we're like, he doesn't like our songs. Did it occur to any single one of you guys in a tie sitting there that maybe he's not the right guy? Like, he doesn't like the material. And so, and again, not a criticism of the label, because they're protecting their investment, and I get it, right? So they're like, oh, sorry, your $250,000 budget. If you're not going to use the guy we think you should use, here's $60,000, which was peanuts for a budget in 1989. Here's $60,000. Go make your little record, because we're not taking that kind of a risk. And we're like, okay, thank you. So we hired Brian Allen, who was our A&R guy at the label. He was actually shocked they didn't like the new songs either, because he thought they were great. So we brought Brian Allen in, we worked up the material again, and we recorded. Honestly, we didn't even have money for a drummer and a bass player. John and I worked with a programmer from California, and we programmed all the drums and the bass on that album ourselves. I don't know if you're aware of that. They were real samples, so it's very organic sounding, but we were one of the first bands to do that on Body Rock. But as a result, I think that the vision of that album was just me and Albany. Like, it was our vision of how we saw our songs. And it was my most successful album in Canada.
I was going to say, what was the response from the label when you turned the album in? But there you go. This is what we can do.
Well, they took credit for everything. That's what they always, it's like, we always thought this was a great idea. So that album, of course, was extremely profitable for everybody because it wasn't done for very much money.
That's crazy. It just goes to show you, though, it's not. I wonder if that other guy just wanted some points on the album for songwriting and publishing and stuff.
That was kind of the culture back then. And like, not to diss him, all these guys took like 3 points off your record, right?
That's great, though. Even like talking like, say, like back then in like the late 80s where you had the foresight and you had that hands-on approach to like, okay, I'll show you what we can do.
No pun intended.
No, but that's awesome. You mentioned you're writing your memoirs. How's that been, revisiting everything?
Well, I've been a little bit sidelined right now just because the last 2 or 3 weeks, the label has got me doing interview after interview after interview. So I've had to sort of shelve that right now. But yeah, I'm in my 4th chapter and I'm meandering my way through my childhood. And I'm finding my childhood a lot more difficult to write about than I thought, because there were definitely some very impactful things that happened to me when I was young that obviously shaped me into the angry young lady artist / rocker that I became, right? And
is it quite therapeutic?
Yeah, I mean, it's good. And it's funny because you go back there and then you start accessing memories. And it's given me a reason to phone my dad a lot because I'm like, okay, Dad, what type of car did Aunt Audrey have? I know it was a Mustang. Was it a green 69 Mustang? Or, you know what I mean? Like he remembers details like that I don't because I was 8.
That's great. Will you put that out yourselves, do you think, or will you get a publisher involved?
I think I would like to get a publisher on board, but I'm going to finish it first. Then I'm going to send it to some friends to read and get their feedback. And my husband is a great editor. He was a writer for 20 years for various publications here in Canada. And so, so that's my plan, is just getting feedback. And he's been great so far because he said, look, don't get bogged down in superfluous detail. He said, what's important is that you give just enough detail that keeps moving your story forward, right? So he's been a great influence just on the direction of the writing already. So that's
sweet. Are you a fan of like rock biographies? Is there anybody you've read stories by who you really enjoy?
Right now, I'm in the middle of reading Jan Arden, and Jeff Tweedy is a great one. And he wrote another great book called How to Write Just One Song, which is really, really great. The Pete Townsend autobiography is fantastic. I'm just trying to think of other ones that I got them sitting on a shelf actually. The Chrissy Hind, Reckless is a great one. And a couple spring breaks ago when I was on vacation with the family, I read Just Kids, Patti Smith, which inspired the song Soho Crawl on the new album, because it's all about that, Andy Warhol, the factory, Chelsea Hotel, crazy art scene in New York.
Well, I look forward to that. That'd be great. And congratulations on the new album. I hope everything goes great with the release. That's out next month, right?
It's coming out July 23rd. We had to push the release back about a month. And unfortunately, it's because vinyl factories, every place in the world, are backed up right now. And the label wanted to release the CD and vinyl simultaneously rather than leaking one first, right? And so, yeah.
Oh, nice one. It'll be worth the wait. But thank you ever so much for your time, Lee. I appreciate it. It's great to hook up, and please pass my thanks on to Sean.
Yeah, anytime. Hey, it was great talking to you, Rob.
I'm walking away. I'm a diamond baby. Whatever you say, I'm letting it go. I'm walking away with a smile on my face. I'm not the same girl you used to know. I'm walking away. I'm a diamond baby. Whatever you say, I'm letting it go, go, go. Walking away with a smile on my face. I'm not the same girl you used to know. No, no. No, no. 'Cause I'm a diamond baby.
I really enjoyed chatting with Lee Aaron here on the Straight to Video podcast, and want to send a big thank you for her time as she builds up to the release of the new album, Radio On. The new record will be released on July 23rd, and to keep up to date, please head on over to leeaaron.com. To stay up to date with this podcast, I'm all over social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, so please get in touch on those with a like or a follow, and you can find all previous episodes of the show over at stvpod.com, which is the hub for all things straight to video. I'm still working on a bunch of new ideas in the background, and I look forward to sharing those with you in the near future. But until we chat again, thanks for all the support and kind words, and look forward to doing it all again very, very soon.